Let's see this working. Shalom. First and foremost, I'd like to give all praise to Yahweh, Ba'Hashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'Hashem, Rakal Kadash. Double honor to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone who are teachers of truth and sincerity. And shout out to Yakims out there in the four quarters of the earth proclaim His truth. Barak the Yahweh, Barak the Yahweh Shai, Ba'Hashem, Rakal Kadash, Barakat. So, well, we told you time and time again this memorandum of understanding was not going to hold, that peace talks were not going to hold, and well, look at this again, you know, fire away, right? Iran again, as tensions threaten fragile truce, so like everything else, U.S. strikes Iran again. As tensions threaten fragile truce. What truce? You know, this memorandum of understanding? Yeah, right. Tehran responded with missile and drone attacks against U.S. bases in Bahrain and Kuwait. Netanyahu claims there is no room for two states. You know, the two-state solution, you know, where Palestine and the Israeli state are recognized. They were never going to hold to that, and they never have. Hezbollah rejects humiliating Lebanon-Israeli framework agreement, which basically means that they're not adhering to, Israeli state's conditions that they disarm Hezbollah. Well, Hezbollah is not going to disarm, period. Bahrain condemns Iranian strikes, urges UN to hold emergency meet. Why? Because you allowed U.S. bases to attack Iran, and your butt hurt because your hosting days are done, and that they blew these assholes away, right? But nonetheless, though, you know, well, the greatest threat to the Greater Israel Project is Iran, and Israeli state knew that. That's why they decided to attack Iran preemptively before even going after Turkey. You know, because they've already grabbed Syria, they've grabbed Iraq. They never had to fire a shot, but they've had Saudi Arabia all along. United Arab Emirates, Oman. You know, so the only one really hindering them, besides Turkey, is Iran. You know, because they've had their way with Libya even. You know, all those places have been turned. But like everything else, though, the greatest threat to the Greater Israel Project is Iran, and that's why after Bashar al-Assad fell, you know, they decided to move in for the kill. And that's why they bombed them last year and continued to bomb them this year, and still are to this day. Ceasefires and memorandums of understandings, you know, basically, this war is ongoing, and it'll never stop. You know, the Third World War cometh quickly as they try to usher in the New World Order, where everybody will have to have an implantable device. But here's what's going on the battlefield. The greatest threat to the Greater Israel Project is Iran, as they have whooped the U.S. ass, and they've definitely been whooping the Israelis' ass as well. So here we go. Last American Vagabond, and he has pretty good videos. Sometimes too lengthy, but this one's not as lengthy.
Welcome back to the latest edition of Foreign Policy with me, Robert Inlakesh, for the Last American Vagabond. And today we're going to be talking about the Greater Israel Project and how it is now on the verge of collapse. Now, the first thing that we have to address and understand is that the Israelis were, of course, the driving force behind the recent attack on Iran, which began on February 28. And the Israeli public were very much up for this fight as well. They overwhelmingly supported the 12-day war in June of 2025 that Israel launched by itself at first, of course coordinating with the United States, and then Donald Trump came in at the end in order to sort of finish that round. The reason why I'm bringing this up in Israeli public opinion is because it's very important to everything else we're going to cover here in this edition of Foreign Policy. So the Israeli public, even after the 12-day war, overwhelmingly agreed that the performance of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was good. They had a positive opinion towards it. They were also favorable of the war even during the conflict itself. They felt as if they had achieved something. And part of this illusion of victory that the Israelis were feeling, this is the Israeli public now, was the fact that in September of 2024, against what they saw as all odds, the Israeli Mossad carried out a series of pager explosions inside of Lebanon, which injured around 2,000 people and killed a few dozen people, many of them belonging to Hezbollah, not all of them militants, because Hezbollah is, of course, the biggest political party inside of Lebanon, and so it has people
It's
who are
really the only government that Lebanon has.
But it pulled off this pager attack. It dealt a serious blow to Hezbollah, and then it managed to assassinate a big chunk of the senior leadership and actually locate some of Hezbollah's weapons and take out, the estimates are between 15 to 25%. The Israelis say 90+% or 85%, something along those lines. But of course, this is just nonsense and propaganda and has now been debunked. But by the end of that war, in 2024, the Israelis believed, because of the propaganda of their government, that they had overcome Hezbollah in Lebanon. And thus they had cut the unity of squares equation between the axis of resistance, which is led by Iran. They had managed to stop Lebanese Hezbollah from waging a support front in favor of the Gaza Strip and the Palestinian resistance factions operating there. So by November 27, 2024, Hezbollah agreed to a ceasefire. And from that time on, Israel violated it repeatedly. There was a pro-US government that came into power.
Just recent history, as he's going into.
Because there was a deadlock for years, and Hezbollah eventually allowed for a new government, which was not favorable to it and its positions, but instead to the United States, to come into power by February of 2025 in order to try and support national cohesion and stop the situation from deteriorating even further. Of course, that has not exactly worked the way perhaps it was intended, but throughout this time, a 15-month period, the Israelis were bombing Lebanon on a, if not a daily basis, a near daily basis. They committed 15,400 ceasefire violations, killed hundreds of people, and you can go and look for yourself exactly what happened during that period. So the Israelis felt dominant. They felt like they had defeated Hezbollah. That's what their leadership was telling them. And then suddenly the Trump administration got in and bombed the nuclear sites inside of Iran, and they believed that this was some sort of victory. And of course their leadership was telling them that they had taken out, a large percentage, 70% or so of Iran's missile launchers, and all of these statistics they threw around, which again later turned out to be utter nonsense, numbers plucked out of thin air. But the Israelis believed it. They were on their high horses, and the leadership began to get arrogant. What we saw at the start of 2026 was that the Israelis, very obviously, and they admitted as such on social media, and you can track it back, attempted to launch a color revolution inside of Iran. This failed. It was put down very quick and very brutally, because there were, of course, militant factions that were engaged in fighting and killing police officers and doing all sorts of things inside of Iran. That was put down, and the protests were no more, but Israel wanted to keep pushing. And of course, Israel knew from its first exchange with Iran that alone it could not defeat the Iranians or deal a significant enough blow in order to weaken Iran sufficiently for their aims. And their overarching aims in the region have been stated since October 7, 2023. Benjamin Netanyahu has been very public about the fact that he's fighting a seven-front war and seeks to achieve total victory and to reshape the Middle East. That's what he wants. And so this was what that war was about. And this goes against U.S. interests because the U.S. wanted the Gulf states to be, of course, aligned with it, continue to invest. This is something that Trump has spoken about, and on copious amounts of occasions, he has brought up the fact of Gulf investment into the trillions he proclaims about. And we'll see how that actually manifests, especially now. And so this was not a war actually in U.S. interests. If the U.S. are trying to solidify their hegemony in the region, this was for the Israelis and their expansionist endeavor. And for those who don't know, the original Ode Yunon plan, which was put forth in an academic article, was proposing a greater Israel, yes, between the Euphrates and the Nile River, but not in terms of what Israel currently looks like today. It wanted an empire, which means that they had to divide up the region into warring ethno-state sectarian regimes that hate each other and that, of course, will completely collapse the modern nation states that grew out of the region and were created in the region. They wanted to destroy all of those states, and so they sought to do this. And in many cases, they partially have achieved those objectives. They have turned a number of states into failed states, of course, with the collaboration of the U.S. and their European Western allies.
Yep, Syria fallen.
They have succeeded on some fronts in terms of what they've been able to get away with, and they wanted to go all the way. What has happened now is that they've found that Iran has successfully resisted, which is why, again, I'm getting back to the opinion polls. 92% of Israelis recently polled said that they believe Iran won the recent war, which we are told has ended with the Memorandum of Understanding. Now, that is a big shift between the majority not only approving of the war, right, in numbers going up to 70+% in 2025, and then afterwards expressing gratitude in an Israeli population that, if you do look at the opinion polls, there is a large chunk of the population that opposes Netanyahu. But on the war with Iran, there was agreement that what was done there was good for Israel. Not this time. And the reason why is because the reality has come back. They haven't actually defeated Hezbollah. Hezbollah came back on March 2nd. It started firing on the Israelis, retaliatory strikes for the 15,400 ceasefire violations documented by UNIFIL, which is the UN peacekeeping forces stationed in Lebanon. So not documented by the Lebanese government or documented by Hezbollah itself, documented by UN peacekeeping forces. They responded to this, and they responded in a major way. And they dragged the Israelis deeper into Lebanon than they have been since 2006, when Hezbollah also defeated the Israelis and forced them to retreat from Lebanese territory, although it took a lot longer for the Israelis to get deep into Lebanon like they did in 2006. And of course, they haven't even taken a lot of this territory which they claim to take. This all being said, the Israelis are now currently in a very tough position. They cannot defeat Hezbollah. They don't have the troops necessary because they have been fighting for over 2 years in the Gaza Strip. And again, they haven't achieved a victory over any single Palestinian armed group in Gaza. All of them are still there. They have failed to actually destroy them. So, of course, they inflicted a genocide in Gaza, and they never wanted to have to sacrifice the troops necessary to go after and dismantle groups like Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, and others that are based in Gaza. They didn't want to actually engage in, ground battles against the Palestinian armed groups. They wanted to fight from a distance and blow up all of the civilian buildings, which is exactly what they have done. They wanted to implement a strategy similar inside of South Lebanon.
And Donald Trump was to make a lot of money off of this deal.
In fact, what's happened now is that the Arab Gulf states, which have always been on the side of the United States, are now pivoting in terms of who they are gravitating towards as the regional power. Before that was the Israelis. And a large part of that was because of American power, that they were pivoting towards the Israeli side. Now they are understanding that the power of Iran is significant. And the Americans had failed to inflict any sort of regime change, any sort of defeat, for various different tactics that were employed, including attempts at stirring a color revolution at the beginning, before they actually launched a full-scale war. And as the Strait of Hormuz was closed for months on end, it became apparent that the impacts to the global economy were growing more and more severe. And Trump had to do something about this, and it looked like, although the Trump administration, which was funded by the Israel lobby and really captured by the Israel lobby, suddenly was jolted back into reality and forced by what you may call even the deep state inside of the United States to at least do something that is going to act as a remedy for the pending economic catastrophe which was coming. And so, in that situation, even if the memorandum of understanding is to collapse and the Israel lobby is to get its way eventually, what's happened is Israel's found itself in a position where instead of collapsing Iran, because in order to have this greater Israel, you cannot have Iran, especially a strong Iran, which now, not only is it continuing to support its allies in the region from Yemen to Palestine, Lebanon, and Iraq, and even beyond in some cases. It used to obviously have a base of operations and ally in Syria, but that has, of course, changed, although there are some groups that appear still to be in that Iranian sphere of influence that did fire from Syrian territory on the Israelis during the 40-day war period that we just had just some months ago. But the Israelis, being contended by the Iranians, they cannot have the Iranians there. They needed to destroy the Iranians, or at least deal such a blow that Iran would be economically devastated. And eventually they hoped that would lead to a failed state scenario. That didn't happen. The Israelis overplayed their hand. And so instead of being able to expand their territory and achieve this great empire in the region, that even the Israeli opposition leader, Yair Lapid, spoke about taking all the way into Iraqi territory, seizing Iraqi territory, which is insanity. But they're now not able to achieve that. And Netanyahu looks very weak, because when Iran threatens to bomb the Israelis in retaliation for action in Lebanon, such as the strikes on Beirut, the Israelis are forced to not strike those targets. They're forced to back down. That is something that is a deterrent equation that Iran was never able to achieve before. So really what has happened is the Israelis have made themselves weaker since October 7th, despite trying to now enact this plan to conquer more territory, to be the most powerful player in the region. They have gone from October 7th to the most hated entity on the planet, that is hated by all of the world's population, essentially. And that still has influence because of its lobbying efforts in Western capitals, but even that is beginning to somewhat fade. And a country that now is not viewed as dominant as the way it was before. Now, it appears that there's a military option to defeating Israel, to putting Israel in its place, that Israel cannot defeat its enemies, that Israel cannot defend itself. right? Of course, it's not actually engaging in self-defense. It's engaging in offensive wars in order to seize territory and create failed states. But now Israel is in a difficult position. Benjamin Netanyahu, who is coming up to an election, it seems like he's just secured that election to take place in October. So he's got a little bit of time to work with now. Is in a desperate position. Now, one option perhaps he could take is to bow out of politics completely and take a plea deal where he bows out of politics in return for his corruption trial going away. But if he does that, then there's no more Netanyahu, and also his right-wing camp, his ultra right-wing camp in Israel, is going to take a hit and not be able to maintain power. The opposition will come in. So there is a high likelihood that Netanyahu will act out of desperation if he cannot get his way through lobbying efforts. And the United States will try and stick to the Memorandum of Understanding, which again is not certain. But if it is forced to because of the reality on the ground, as Iran has demonstrated even recently, it still has the missile capabilities to hit US bases with great precision throughout the region, and therefore it could hit oil assets, power plants, desalination facilities, etc. if the war got to that stage. And the only real options that the Israelis and the Americans have are to go after Iran's infrastructure. And if you want to go after their infrastructure, for example, there's around 400 power plants throughout Iran. That's no small number. And a lot of them are built, of course, with war in mind. And so destroying them is not as easy as just firing a missile or two into them. They have to be subjected to repeated attacks. And that's just the power plants. There's, of course, many other targets. If that happens, though, at the same time, the entire region is going to be lit up, which means all those allies of the United States in the Gulf, including allies where Donald Trump himself has personal investments at stake, are going to be obliterated too. And the idea for Israel is that this will go as long as Israel can continue to take the punishment that it gets. But that's not a good option for the United States. That's a terrible option for the United States. And it will drain more of its strategic arsenal, drain more of its cruise missile arsenal, which has already been greatly depleted. I mean, half of its air defense munitions have been completely defeated, so they can barely even defend their own bases. And a lot of those air defenses, of course, are transferred over to the Israelis to protect the Israelis over U.S. service members. Again, not a very good scenario. If you capture an island in the Persian Gulf, if you manage to capture it, which will not be with Israeli ground forces, it will be with Americans who will die to take Karg Island or, Greater or Lesser Tumb or Abu Musa, these smaller islands, or Qishim, something like that. This is not going to change the reality that Iran can still fire missiles and close down the Strait of Hormuz. Like, for instance, Yemen's Ansarullah was able to withstand a month and a half of a U.S. attack, and they weren't able to open up Bab el-Mandab to allow for free passage of ships through the Red Sea. So if you can't defeat Yemen and open up the Red Sea, you can't open up the Persian Gulf for sure, especially not by occupying an island. It's symbolic at best. So the Trump administration is caught in a difficult position, to say the least. And the Israelis
Pandora's box is
are in a
open.
position where Benjamin Netanyahu is going to come to a make or break moment. And we'll have to watch to see whether he is going to try and drag the United States into war again through some sort of
what the scriptures say.
Something to take into account here, the Israelis really have no real options left to achieve this greater Israel project. And so now, with that defeated, it can either enter into forever wars, just on and off warfare, until eventually either it uses nuclear weapons or it's completely destroyed. Or it can pull back from Lebanese territory, from Syrian territory, and it can engage in an agreement with the Palestinian Authority, which will do an agreement with it, and try and get a so-called two-state solution. And of course, the two-state solution is not favorable to the Palestinians, it's favorable to the Israelis. It is a pro-Israel solution.
Yeah, always has been.
The solution here is a two-state solution. That means giving up territory. And the real question here is, with the Israeli public being so incredibly radicalized, will they be able to take such a concession? And the answer to that question is probably no. So Israel is on a downwards trajectory here.
Yep.
And this is why I would say
it's taking Babylon down with
them
it.
to do some pretty dangerous things and unpredictable things as well in the near future, because their very existence perhaps depends upon this. And this is all due to their actions. This is all because
they're going to hell, and America's coming right along with
and
them.
The genocide that they have carried out. The position they are in now is because they believed they were the superpower. They believed they were invincible. And I don't believe they're going to let that go without some kind of fight. So we do have to continue to monitor this, because there could be a few more tricks up their sleeves. But until something like that does happen, this is it for this episode of Foreign Policy with me, Robert Inlacash, for The Last American Vagabond.
And like everything else, though, you'd be looking at Damascus, right? The Israeli state possibly taking Damascus and Damascus getting destroyed. Because no matter what, Russia is going to be allied with all those places. They're going to pretty much be the new sheriff. That's why he's referred to as the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And he's going to come in there. And he's going to go after those Israelis. He's going to wipe out all the Israeli positions and go into greater Israel. And Syria gets destroyed. The heart of it, Damascus, gets destroyed. Syria gets destroyed at the same time. Well, that's exactly where those Israeli terrorists are and the occupying forces. So it seems to me at that point that they had captured Damascus. More than just ISIS there. But ISIS is really Israeli Secret Intelligence Services, either way you slice and dice it. Al-Jilani really works with King Bibi. So, like everything else, so you can see where that's going. But wait, there's more. Yeah. Well, we told you that the memorandum of understanding and that the 60-day ceasefire is a fluke, as this video goes into. RT's talking about it.
Joining us live from New Jersey is the director of the North-South Project for Human Rights at the Black Alliance for Peace, Jamo Baraka. Thank you very much for joining us on the program. Now, we're getting a sense of, Groundhog Day. It's not the first time a ceasefire between Iran and the US has been breached. So what might be different this time, in your view?
Well, I mean, this is not the first time. Basically, what has happened is that the Israelis have been breaching the so-called ceasefire from the very beginning of this so-called ceasefire period. And the Iranians have not retaliated. They have held their fire, I think, in an attempt to try to maintain the status quo of the moment. It's unfortunate that the U.S. continues to, in fact, objectively wage war on Iran and call it a retaliatory strike. It remains to be seen what the response may be from Iran. But I think that what we are seeing is what many of us believe to be the case, and that is that we may not even get through the 60-day pause before there's a continuation of military conflicts. Because I don't believe there are
4th of July is in a few days.
Definitely not in Israel.
They need a false flag
to creating the conditions for a permanent peace in West Asia.
Today's US strikes on Iranian infrastructure are the first since the Memorandum of Understanding was signed last week. However, what's unusual is the American army says it continues to adhere to the agreement with Tehran. So what do you make of that? What's this new normal we have, where this back and forth has become, just the normality during this so-called ceasefire?
Well, it's an attempt to try to establish a new norm, something very similar to what we have with Israel. When you have a ceasefire, but Israel will continue to, in fact, fire while the other side will cease. And I think that the U.S. is moving in that same direction. So it remains to be seen how this may balance itself out. But again, I would not be surprised if there is an intensification of these kinds of episodes because of the fact that some powerful forces are very much opposed to this agreement, both in the U.S. and Israel and also in Iran.
US Congress recently passed war powers resolution that's supposed to restrict President Trump from further attacks on Iran, but it seems he can do that anyway. So what else can Congress do to restrict Trump's war powers?
Well, the question assumes that there is a real attempt, a real desire on the part of Congress to, in fact, put restraints on the president. I don't think that's the case. I think that what they would like to see, I think, is a bipartisan consensus that the job has to be finished. Now, how they want that to unfold would be with Congress playing some kind of role. And I think that was the impetus for this resolution that doesn't really have the force of law. So it's the kind of internal political jockeying that we see inside the U.S., but we should not be confused by its implications. There is a strong consensus on the part of members of Congress and in the ruling elements that the job has to be finished. And what is the job? The job is the total destruction of the Iranian state as we know it.
This coming hot on the heels of this framework agreement being signed by Israel and Lebanon. It's already been hailed as historic. However, Hezbollah has rejected it. Netanyahu insists the IDF will remain in Lebanon. What's your assessment of that deal and the reaction to it so far?
Well, the Lebanese president has demanded that Israel vacate sovereign Lebanese territory, and that is the basis for the conflict. It's not about the security of Israeli settlements in northern Israel. It's about the desire on the part of the Israeli settler state to expand, to realize its goal of a greater Israel. Until there is some resolution of that, until the Israelis are persuaded to abandon their goal of a greater Israel, we won't see peace between Israel and Hezbollah. Hezbollah is the main actor providing, as they see it, and as many Lebanese people see it, defense of the Lebanese territory, of the Lebanese nation against an invading force. That is the reality that the Lebanese president has to deal with also. So there will be no resolution of this conflict until Hezbollah is brought into the discussions, and more importantly, Israel decides it's going to abandon its desire to try to covenant and control Lebanese territory.
So where are we, would you say, right now? It's been almost 10 days since the US and Iran signed their memorandum of understanding, but does it look like the region is actually any closer to a lasting peace? And which sides might be interested in keeping the wars going?
You gotta laugh at this shit.
Well, as I said, there are powerful forces that would like to see the conflict reignited. They want to see that there's real constraints placed on the Iranian state. There are forces, though, even ones aligned with the U.S., that would like to see a return to some degree of normal, meaning that the shooting stops. And those are many of the vassal states of the U.S. government. That is, they're playing they are experiencing a horrendous price for the continuation of this war. So there are pressures to end the war, but I think there are greater pressures in Israel and in the U.S. For a continuation of it. But until there is a real consensus on the part of forces in the U.S. that can only come about as a consequence of popular forces coming from the public in the U.S. to end the war, I think there's a real possibility that this 60 days will be no more than just a pause before the conflict intensifies once again.
Yep, the least of the flock shall draw them out, shall make their habitations desolate with them. You see, like everything else, though, this war, it's going to go through posturing back and forth. Now, like everything else, though, I know that was lengthy, but again, you got a few other things going on. Not a whole lot, but just, that the wars continue, right? Because war is always in his heart. They talk peace, but they're really about war. Trump seeks to end years of acting leadership at ISIS. U.S. President urged Senate to immediately confirm Oklahoma's law enforcement veteran as the agency's director. In other words, he wants a new ISIS leader in of course, Oklahoma. U.S. President Trump nominated Oklahoma law enforcement veteran to lead ISIS, an agency at the center of administration's controversial crackdown against Israelites, because that's who they're after. If confirmed, he would become ISIS' first permanent director in nearly a decade. In a social media post on Saturday, Trump urged lawmakers to act quickly. The Senate must confirm Lance immediately. Do not delay. He went on to describe Schroyer as a former Oklahoma State trooper and a Marine who would do what it takes to detain and deport illegal alien criminals at a rate they've never seen before. Likes of which no one has ever seen before. Yeah, you can go after the weaklings, but the weak are going to say that they are strong because you're an embarrassment. So the only thing you can do is go after Israelites because you're getting your asses whipped by the Persians. And don't forget the Medes, too. Because Russia's been winning the war against Ukraine. Another proxy war that they've been trying to do. Everything they do is failing. And there's a reason for that. The Most High is against Esau. Trump threatens Iran as U.S. conducts new strikes. CENTCOM said the operation came in response to a drone attack on a ship in the Strait. That's the reason, but this is their second day. The U.S. conducted strikes against Iran for the second consecutive day on Saturday in response to attacks on commercial vessels attempting to transit through the Strait. Resumption of open hostilities is testing the preliminary peace agreement between the two countries, just like the previous video said. So, like everything else, though, here's some video. I don't know if I can blow it up. Yeah, it looks like I can, but it takes forever. So, indeed. Well, you already know what Iran's capable of. And they said they still ain't sent out their best shit yet. Yeah. They still got more missiles because they know that this war is far from over. They already know that the U.S. will never be able to rebuild their shit anymore. The shooting the Strait ain't over, but a little over a week since the U.S. and Iran signed the MOU, some ships have been trapped in the Persian Gulf, rushed to travel through the corridor, with many trying to use the alternative route on the southern side of the strait. This is what caused the event to take place. International Maritime Organization has coordinated the alternative routing with Oman hugging the United Arab Emirates and Muslim Peninsula coastline, avoiding the Central Passage that Iran had mined. This route was significant because it bypassed Iran's designated corridor entirely, which ran closer to Iranian territorial waters. However, Iran and Oman agreed to a new framework for the future administration of the strait on Tuesday, the 24th of June. The two countries agreed to establish a joint working group between their foreign countries to discuss future navigation rules and administration of the strait, services provided, safety, pilotage, associated costs in accordance with international standards. Both emphasized their sovereignty over the territorial waters in the strait. But like everything else, though, the reason why that ship was fired upon is because they did not negotiate with either side. The only authorized route for passage through the strait is the one designated by the Islamic Republic of Iran. Vessel traffic outside these routes is extremely dangerous and prohibited. Violators will be dealt with, and that's what happened. That's what started this string of attacks, right? Because they're still trying to work their way around it. And, well, it's not holding, right? Attacks on Iran reflect U.S.'s commitment violating nature. Yeah, they don't agree to any ceasefire. They're a joke. Iran says renewed U.S. aerial attacks on the country demonstrate their reneging on promises as part of the terrorist regime's nature. It said the brutal attacks are a clear violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the United Nations Charter, as well as a flagrant breach of Article 1 of the recent signed Memorandum of Understanding between Iran and the U.S. These attacks show that the U.S. regime does not place the slightest value or credibility on its commitments, and that breaking promises is part of the regime's nature, it added. The ministry also reminded the UN Chief and Security Council of their responsibility regarding international peace and security, and further stressed Iran's determination to defend its national sovereignty and territorial integrity against U.S. military aggression in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. So, like everything else, though, they know that this was a pretext. The U.S. bombed Iran for a second day under the pretext of responding to the IRGC's Navy confronting a trespassing vessel in the strait. IRGC delivered a decisive response to the enemy by launching a large-scale missile and drone operation against 8 U.S. military installations in the region. So, henceforth, vessels found in violation to be dealt with more firmly than before. A noted warning of crushing response to any future aggression by the enemy. So, like everything else, so they want to escalate, well, and they want a war with Iran, they got one. Tehran retaliates against Bahrain, Kuwait, after U.S. bombing campaign along Iranian coast. I'm sure they hit more, but those are the main states that were hit. Air raid siren Blair in Bahrain, as well as Kuwait's military, says its air defenses are responding to hostile missile and drone attacks. The U.S. bombed Iran for the second day, hitting the city of Sirak, Bandar Delaink, and Kusham Island, following drone attack on a commercial vessel near the strait. Israeli state bombed southern Lebanon again, killing at least one person a day after signing a framework agreement with the Lebanese government to end hostilities. So you can see how well that went. So here's some of the what the retaliatory strikes look like. I believe this is Bahrain. And you already seen what they've done to Bahrain in previous videos since the beginning of the war. Iran Foreign Minister warns any challenge to Hormuz routes will increase tensions. The recent clashes have tested the negotiating process meant to end the war launched by the U.S. and Israeli state against Iran. Iran's top diplomat warned Sunday that any attempt to bypass the strait routes agreed with the U.S. would increase tensions in West Asia as the country's traded attacks and accusations of violating fragile ceasefire in the region. During a visit to Iraqi capital Baghdad, Agashi called for the establishment of a security framework with Gulf countries, with Tehran and D.C. accusing each other of violating fragile truce that was meant to end the U.S.-Israeli war on Iran. So like everything else, so you know, they're now looking at, like the first video said, about Iran being the actual driving force there, and that, you know, pretty much the only one with any stability is Iran, you know. But like everything else, a new broker will be coming to town soon. He just hasn't made his way there yet, right? But you know that he will, because the scriptures tell you he will. How U.S. violations of Memorandum of Understanding bolsters Iran's Hormuz leverage and regional deterrence. Yeah, it's just making them stronger, right? The weak saying they are strong. Barely weeks after affixing its signature to a war-ending Memorandum of Understanding with Tehran, D.C. carried out another act of unprovoked military aggression on Iranian soil on Friday night, in flagrant violation of the provisions of understanding. The attack, which targeted Sirik Island in southern Hamadan province, is the latest in a series of provocative military actions that drew swift and decisive Iranian retaliation. The pretext for the latest aggression was to mount a challenge to Iran's lawful enforcement of our sovereignty over the strait, particularly as U.S. naval forces continue their dangerous pattern of maritime banditry in regional waters. So, like everything else, though, yeah. You can see that the Memorandum of Understanding is a complete fluke. And in fact, you know, this so-called agreement, they ain't even done the first steps. They're continuing to bomb anyways. Israeli army to begin pilot withdrawal from southern Lebanon. Well, I don't see them really withdrawing. This gives you the illusion that they are, but they haven't really done that. Israeli army is preparing to begin the pilot phase of its withdrawal from southern Lebanon as early as Sunday, under a recent signed framework agreed between Beirut and Tel Aviv, according to Israeli media reports. Withdrawal is expected to begin from one of the two pilot phases specified in the agreement. Under the agreement, a direct communication channel is also expected to be open between the Israeli state and Lebanon. On Thursday, Lebanon and Israeli state signed a U.S.-sponsored framework agreement stipulating a phased Israeli withdrawal from Lebanese territory beginning the two pilot areas. And you know the Israeli state ain't going to even honor that. Iran demands clear timetable for Israeli withdrawal from occupied Lebanese territory. They don't want to hear excuses. They want an actual framework. Can't blame them for that, because if there's going to be a memorandum of understanding, they better do it within a significant amount of time. Iran has called for the establishment of a clear timetable for Israeli withdrawal from the occupied areas of Lebanon, describing it as an essential condition for achieving a lasting agreement to end the war and ensure regional security. Foreign Ministry spokesman made the remarks on Sunday in response to questions from reporters about the agreement signed between Israeli state and Lebanon. He reiterated Iran's long-standing position on Lebanese sovereignty, saying the Islamic Republic considers the protection of Lebanon's national sovereignty and territorial integrity, along with safeguarding the dignity and security of all Lebanese citizens, to be fundamental prerequisite for any sustainable agreement aimed at ending the war and Israeli military presence on the country. So, pretty much so. As you can see, that those memorandum of understanding and all that, well, you already know about the Samson option, and you already know that the least of the flock shall draw them out. Well, you know, they're going to be desolate. At the end of the day, Tel Aviv, occupied Jerusalem, they're going to be totally desolate. Because guess who's really going to come in at the end of this? Yahweh Shai, and he's going to wipe out the rest of Edom, which is in fact the better known as the Russians, right? You know, because a lot of people talk, well, Sakari group in particular talks about how Russia's going to rule for a while. No, they're not. At the same time, Russia and its forces are taken out as well. So, you know, make no mistake about it that, you know, not just Babylon the Great is going to fall at that time. At the same time, Russia and its forces, all of Edom is going to be taken, which is why it says Edom in these verses. You know, yes, the capital is Basra, is America, but Russia's going to be taken out too. All of Edom is going to be taken out. Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 20, it reads, "Therefore hear what the Most High Yahweh has planned against Edom. when he has purpose against those who live in Teman. The least of the flock will be dragged away. Their pasture will be appalled by their fate. And that is pretty much so. They're going to be destroyed. At the sound of their fall, the earth will tremble. That's by way of that earthquake. Their cry will resound to the Red Sea. Because, Damascus, Syria, all the way through the Israeli state is also going to be destroyed. Look, an eagle will soar and swoop down, spreading its wings over Basra. And that's talking about the chariots. And that day the heart of Edom's warriors will be like the heart of a woman in labor. That's seeing all this destruction. Knowing that its days are determined. So the Most High has a determination for Esau, Edom. And at the same time, Damascus is consumed. Concerning Damascus, Hamath and Arpad are dismayed. They have heard bad news. They are disheartened, troubled like the restless sea. Damascus has become feeble, has turned to flee. Panic has gripped her. Anguish and pain have seized her. Pain like that of a woman in labor. And this is the NIV. Why is the city of renown not been abandoned, in the town in which I delight? Surely her young men will fall in her streets. All her soldiers will be silenced in that day, declares the Lord Yahweh Almighty. I will set fire to the walls of Damascus, and it will consume the fortresses of Ben-Hadad. The kingdom of Syria will be taken in that day, at the same time that Babylon is taken. At the same time, those bastards dwelling in Ashdod are taken. The Most High, Yahweh, is going to send Yahweh Shai to take the crowns from all of Edom. So, hopefully this has been edifying, and like everything else though, before that happens, they're going to usher in their new world order. And you already know about the Samson option, which pretty much says, if we fall, the world falls with us. Nobody wins. The nuclear mindset of the wicked. And that's, of course, dealing with the least of the flock. Because everybody knows about the Samson option, as this video goes into. GMS All Precepts, you can catch it on his channel as well. I'm just going to play some of it, the majority of it, and I'm going to close this out. Then I want to say Bracha the Yahweh, Bracha the Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem, Rakal Kadosh, Wa Abal Babal. Brakatam, Jehovah elect. Shalom. So, without further ado.
I know you think that I don't care.
All right, Shalom. I want to give all the praise, honor, and glory to Yahweh Bahasham, Yahweh Shai, Bahasham Rakah Kodash. Double honor to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who told me this truth, and Shalom to the hopeful elect. I'm back with another quick lesson through the Holy Spirit of the Rakah Kodash. You know who is threatening to use nukes against the world?
Is Israel threatening to annihilate all of us unless they get their way, like a spoiled rotten brat at the grocery store at the final little stretch, crying and screaming for a candy bar? If you don't give it to me, I'm just going to basically go nuclear right here in the aisle. That's maybe what Israel is going to do. They might go nuclear on us if they don't get their way. Look at this tweet. This is from Ian Carroll. He says, Israel is now openly threatening to use nukes against the world. Ironically, this is exactly why they should be disarmed and their future statehood called into serious question. Why the Zionist project should never have begun. Violent tribalism and existential victim narrative is the most dangerous combination possible, and it is fundamental to Israeli identity.
There you go. You see, we told you, man. Okay, the scriptures repeatedly teach that although the wicked may prosper for a season, judgment eventually catches up with them. Okay, so now they're cornered, their back is against the wall. Okay, and if they go down, they're ready to take the entire world with them. You see? Let me get this real quick. This is Micah, chapter 2, verse 3. And it reads, it says, therefore, thus saith the Lord, Yahweh Shai, Shai, behold against this family, all right, the Edomites, okay, the international banking elite, these Amalekites, okay, the house of Esau, man. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, Yahweh Shai, behold against this family do I devise an evil, from which you should not remove your necks. Like the elder says, they can't slither their way out of judgment. Okay, they can't wiggle their way out. Okay, from which you should not remove your necks, neither shall you go heartily, for this time is evil. Right, all the evil that these devils have done is now catching up. Okay, eventually all evil will catch up to the wicked, man. This is what we see. All right, Job 20 in verse 4, it reads, it says, knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon earth? Verse 5, that the triumphing of the wicked is short. See, we're at the end of Esau's rule. Okay, 2 Ezra 6:9, Esau is the end of the world, and Jacob is the beginning of it that followeth, man. Okay, we're in the midst of that transition. We're watching this thing play out. Okay, that the triumphing of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment. Okay, though his excellency mount up to the heavens, and his head reaches unto the clouds, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, where is he? He shall fly away as a dream and shall not be found. All right, this is the end of the ruling hegemony of the Edomites, man. Okay? Yea, he shall be chased away as a vision of the night. The eye also which saw him shall see him no more. Neither shall his place any more behold him. Let me read this in NLT, all right? Starting at verse 5 here. Again, NLT, Joel 20:5. The triumph of the wicked has been short-lived, and the joy of the godless has been only temporary. Though the pride of the godless reaches to the heavens, and their heads touch the clouds, yet they will vanish forever. Thrown away like their own dung, those who knew them will ask, where are they? They will fade like a dream and not be found. They will vanish like a vision in the night. Those who once saw them will see them no more. Their families will never see them again. So this is it here. You know, like it says in Isaiah 47, they didn't consider the latter end. Okay? All of this wickedness, evil, okay, blasphemy, okay, that these devils have committed throughout the earth, is all catching up now, man. Okay? Ecclesiastes 8, okay, dealing with all the scriptures that talk about, you know, how, you know, even though the wickedness goes on, all right, but judgment, you know, always follows. It catches up. Okay? Ecclesiastes 8 and 11, because sentence against the evil word is not executed speedily. Therefore, the heart of the sons of men is fully set in them to do evil. Okay? And nobody was able to stop these people, man. Okay? These devils were able to reign terror across the planet Earth for centuries, man. You know? Verse 12, though a sinner do evil 100 times and his days be prolonged, yet surely I know that it should be well with them that fear the Most High, which fear before him. Verse 13, but it should not be well with the wicked. See? But it should not be well with the wicked, neither shall he prolong his days. Okay? His days have been cut short. He's reached bounds that he can't pass. Neither shall he prolong his days, which are as a shadow, because he feareth not before the Most High. Okay? NLT, when a crime is not punished quickly, people feel it is safe to do wrong. And these devils have gotten proud, man. They've gotten away for centuries with their crimes against humanity, okay, against the Lord's people. You know, all of this terror that they, you know, spread throughout the earth. So that they've gotten proud, puffed up. You know, scripture said that pride goeth before destruction. Verse 12, but even though a person sins 100 times and still lives a long time, I know that those who fear the Most High will be better off. Verse 13, NLT, the wicked will not prosper, for they do not fear the Most High. Their days will never grow long like the evening shadows. There you go.
Is Israel threatening to annihilate all of us unless they get their way, like a spoiled rotten brat at the grocery store at the final little stretch, crying and screaming for a candy bar? If you don't give it to me, I'm just going to basically go nuclear right here in the aisle. That's maybe what Israel is going to do. They might go nuclear on us if they don't get their way. Look at this tweet. This is from Ian Carroll. He says, Israel is now openly threatening to use nukes against the world. Ironically, this is exactly why they should be disarmed and their future statehood called into serious question. Why the Zionist project should never have begun. Violent tribalism and existential victim narrative is the most dangerous combination possible, and it is fundamental to Israeli identity. There are only two possible outcomes. Either they rule the world and all bow to their chosenness, or they keep picking fights until the whole world turns on them and they are destroyed. The slippery part is that it's not just Israel. They have dragged the entire global Jewish population into this adversarial and unconscionable position, and the real power structure of Israel is dispersed across the global network of Jewish billionaires and bankers that support it and represent the true power of the project.
Yeah. So, you know, like I said a few weeks back in one of my lessons, it makes sense why they're going to use the Samson option. Now we see that. Okay? Because this day eventually was going to come. All right? And all the wickedness of their actions would catch up to these damn devils, man. All right? And like I said yesterday in the video I did going into them spying on American Christians and churches, right? Like I said, it's really them versus everybody. These small hats versus the world. So as you see, this is another act of war. Okay? If they can't have their way, if the world doesn't bow down to their you know, demands, okay, they're ready to use nukes against the whole entire earth, man. You know, this is a fucking cowardly people, man. You know, but the Lord is getting ready to take them out. This is Proverbs chapter 13. Okay, in verse 21. Because all this evil eventually overtakes the wicked, all right? This is Proverbs 13 and 21. It says, evil pursueth sinners, right? Evil pursueth sinners, but to the righteous good shall be repaid. NLT, trouble chases sinners, while blessings reward the righteous. There you go, man. You know?
Now he is referring to this is a message that was put, this is, well, just watch this.
Israel's existence is not negotiable. And it does not depend on superpowers or the public opinion. And if they keep pushing Israel to the corner, they are the ones who are going to suffer the most.
Have to make fun of this guy.
Israel hasn't used everything that it has. And Israel, on a purpose, did not expose the advanced weapons that it has for a very important reason. We don't want the enemy to know what we are having. And now, at this point, we're just playing around. So this is the clear message to those who think that they can annihilate Israel. Behind Israel is existence.
So Israel has secret weapons we don't even know about, and they'll bring them out if they have to.
Yeah, they get ready to use that Samson option, man. Okay? Let's think about this one too. All right, the candle of the wicked should be put out. All right, Proverbs 24:19, right? Proverbs 24:19. And it reads, "Fret not thyself because of evil men, neither be thou envious at the wicked." Verse 20. For there should be no reward to the evil man. The candle of the wicked shall be put out. You see that? So the prosperity of the wicked is going to be rewarded with what? Ultimate destruction.
So I'm going to go ahead and split this and just watch part 2, and I'll just pick up from here. Then I will say Bracha the Yahweh, Bracha the Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rekakadosh, Wa Abal Babal. Brakatam, Jehovah elect, Shalom.